Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this session. I'm Ibril Han, and I'm part of the Women's Forum program team. I'm pleased to welcome you to Fireside Chat Pandemic Pivots, Responding and Recovering Better. Before I introduce our moderator, a quick reminder, you can follow and engage with the session on social media using the hashtag #WomenForInclusion, and we invite you to ask your questions in the chat. And now, it's my great pleasure to introduce Annette Young. She's the host of the 51% at France 24. Annette, over to you.
Let me introduce two incredibly accomplished women who I'm very sad to say I'm not going to be able to meet in the flesh, but one day hopefully that will happen. First of all is Anne Mukherjee, who joined Pernod Ricard, North America as chairman and CEO in December 2019 as the first industry outsider and a woman of colour to assume the position. Among her many, many achievements, Anne led the Absolute team in taking a stand on consent, forcing a critical conversation on a taboo topic for the alcohol industry. She rallied the company's manufacturing facilities to produce hand sanitizer in support of federal and local government's response to COVID-19, and she's currently calling on associations, social media platforms and brands across the industry to join an open source consumer movement to help stop hate speech online. Also with me is Emily Ketchen, who's the Chief Marketing Officer and Vice President for PCs and Smart Devices at Lenovo. She joined the company just shortly before the pandemic hit, and in an extensive career, she's also held senior roles, among others, at LinkedIn and McCann Erickson. Now, we will be taking questions from you, the viewing audience, later on the session, but let's begin with me asking my two fabulous panelists this question, and I'm going to direct it first to Anne and then to Emily. As I say, we've witnessed a global pandemic that has upended people's lives. It doesn't matter where you are on the globe, you have been affected by this. I want to start this discussion with this question to the both of you. I want to ask you, how has the pandemic affected you personally? Anne.
Well, Annette, first of all, let me just say what a pleasure it is to be here with you. And Emily, it's great to partner with you on this session, and hello to everyone out there. What an incredible forum. And you're asking a really important question, Annette, because I got to tell you, it has been over sensorial load. What can go wrong, it seems, has gone wrong in this world, whether it is the pandemic. Here in the United States with social unrest, we've had a very difficult political environment. But I think the biggest thing for me is that for me to cope, I went back into myself to be who I am, and that is a woman. And I think one of the biggest things that I'm learning is in times of crisis, people should just dig deep and be who they are. It's in our personal experiences where we have faced pain that we can find lessons in that and turn that into power. And so as a leader, I'm trying very hard to be very vulnerable and be open about my reactions to this as a leader and think about how that affects all the people that I have the great privilege to lead. And I have to tell you, while I'm so worried about people's physical safety, I'm now even more worried about their mental safety. And we need to talk more about that. Thankfully, I work for an incredible company who believes that Alex Ricard, our global chairman, said something very important. We should probably have not coined this as social distancing. We should have coined this as physical distancing, because now more than ever, we need to be socially connected.
Indeed, and very powerful words there. And Emily, can I ask you, how has this year impacted your life?
Yeah, so thank you so much, Annette. And I would echo Anne's sentiments. It's great to be here, and thank you for having us. For me, the really interesting part of this is that in the context of this very unusual time for the world, I actually made a pretty big change and took on a new role, as you said, just eight weeks ago. And I think for me, where this really comes into play is that when I think about let's say, for example, one of my very favorite quotes, it's by Aristotle, right? And it's really all about choice and not chance that determines your destiny. And I really believe that. And I want us as women to think about that in the context of our lives. There was a huge opportunity for me in this particular role that I think was also important, end-to-end, the ability to sort of influence and take that next step. But I also think the company's very bold mission to enable smarter tech for all is super inspiring. You just heard Anne talk about connection and connectivity and how important that is. It's been a lifeline for me in terms of being able to be productive and stay connected. Can you imagine starting a new role 10 or 20 years ago, trying to meet your colleagues on the phone versus what technology brings to us and the capability to see you and to be here and to be in person? It's interesting how the nucleus for many of us has become home, work from home, learn from home, play from home. So I think the ability to connect and to see one another has been a huge benefit for many of us. And so that's what I think about in terms of the personal effect of where we are today.
Indeed, Emily, and as you pointed out there, if this had happened 20 years ago, it would have been an incredibly different story for all of us. And let me come back to you. The onus on companies as a result has changed dramatically in 2020. It's not just a case of return on investment, but a return on responsibility, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's something I think it was at a tipping point, and I think right now it has just accelerated. And, I always say to people, we all matter, whether it's individually. I'm from Kolkata in India, and one of my inspirations is Mother Teresa. And she always said, every ocean is made up of every drop of water. And whether we're individuals or we are working for large corporations, we have a responsibility. It's not, just making money. It's about or trying to win share of the marketplace. We should be worried about the share of the future. And what do we want that future to look like? And so when we're making decisions, you talked about our hand sanitizer. You talked about, what we're doing in terms of starting a movement to stop hate on social media. We have to think about things like we have an environment out there that we are trying desperately to save. The social environment is just as important. It can't get polluted. It's only when human beings come together can we be resilient. And so now is a time to start thinking about that as equally as we do in terms of driving our businesses.
Emily, has the pandemic forced your company in particular to rethink about its attitudes and approach towards inclusion?
I think it's a great question. I think one of the things that we have been doing is really building on a culture of flexibility in terms of our workplace. Long before the pandemic, I think we felt it was very important to both entrust and empower our employees to really design their day and to think about how to do that in a way that enables them to be most productive. I think that's a huge issue, not only for employees, but especially for women today. How do you balance or integrate all of the different demands that are on you? I think the other thing specific to sort of the inclusion side, Annette, is that when I think about innovation and how important that is to us, the reality is that is a cornerstone. Diversity is really a cornerstone of that for us. We've built the first 5G computer, we've built the first foldable PC, but it doesn't stop there. In fact, for us, it's really diversity by design. We established a diversity office to sharpen our focus on product and products that appeal universally, that will work for many, many more people, ensuring that diversity and inclusion plays a role in that end-to-end process. I can't stress how important that is for us. If we're building products for the world, they need to reflect the world. And I think that's something that we've undertaken with a great deal of passion to be able to, keep diversity and inclusion at the fore. as part of what we're doing today.
And the definition of leadership, as we know, is changing as more and more women reach senior roles in both corporate life and in politics. Just look at how those female leaders in New Zealand, Germany, Finland, for instance, navigated their countries through this pandemic. Part of that understanding, I think, is the fact that we need to place greater emphasis and value on empathy in leadership. So what do businesses need to do to encourage that to flourish within a workspace?
Yeah, for many people, I have a very favorite movie that a lot of people do. It's called The Godfather. And in that movie, they talk a lot about how it's not personal, it's business. Let me be clear, that is no longer true. It is as much personal as it is business. And as women leaders, we need to remember we by nature are nurturers. And we need to embrace that about us and our experiences as mothers, as wives, as sisters. We have a nurturing ability which naturally allows for empathy. And our ability to help people understand that empathy is important in business. I don't care what company you work for. I don't care if you're in a services business, you are a manufacturing business. At the end of the day, you need human beings to interact with your company. And we have to remember we're in the human being business. I don't care what industry you're in. So the thing that I would say to women, for them to really bring that to light, I say this to every woman in the world, please stop being perfect. Perfection is a sickness. It is in our imperfection that we bring beauty to the world. And as leaders, we need to help people understand that. And we as women are uniters. So it's time for us as leaders to unite.
Emily, given what Anne has just said, I mean, part of the problem about that issue of perfection, about placing the burden of seeking perfection on women, has come from the world of business, because businesses make money off that. So, I mean, that's a tough challenge, I think, for every sort of part of corporate life. So how do you change that?
You know, I think it comes back to the real responsibility of leaders and of women. And I think we set the tone, we are role models, and I think we hearken to what we do to lead by example. And for me, a huge piece of that is what I call vulnerability in leadership. I think it's very important, and it's kind of counterintuitive, right? You think leaders should be strong and out there and rallying. I actually think there's a tremendous amount of power in softness, in empathy, in understanding your employees, understanding where they're communicating to you from. I also am a huge advocate of women lifting women. You know, Madeleine Albright has a wonderful quote that says, you know, there's a special place in hell for women who don't take care of other women. And I think that's incredibly important, whether it's in the context of being an excellent mentor, a great coach, or a fantastic sponsor. And all three of those things are different. All three of those things make up who we are as leaders. And I think it's very important to us to use that. You know, I have two daughters, Annette, that are, 17 and 11. They're incredibly impressionable. And I so relate to Anne's statement around perfection, trying not to encourage them to always be perfect about everything they do, and yet give them the values that will sustain them in a world that changes every moment. So I think that's really important. And I think as women, the last thing I'll say is, please be generous. Be generous with your time, be generous with your thoughts, take care of those around you, and together we rise.
And let's now move the conversation towards diversity and inclusion. The Black Lives Matters protests show the level of anger that exists out there in society. And obviously the pandemic has only served to reinforce the anger about the level of inequality. How can corporations address this very difficult issue?
Yes, it is. I think one of the things, again, I think the pandemic has accelerated, and it's showing injustice in ways that I think was hidden before. And when Black Lives Matter hit here in the United States, I have to tell you, my own employees, I mean, they were breaking down. And, as a leader, the first thing I did, and I've never done this before, I canceled all my meetings for 3-4 days, and I went on a listening tour. And I talked to employee group after employee group, just letting me absorb what they were going through. I have women in the field who are going into accounts or in different parts of our business. I have people of color who are going in and they are being discriminated in ways I can't even repeat. And I started to realize this is something I have to go do. This is something, by listening to people, we've got to put actions into place, not big plans. I'll come back to you in a year. And I will tell you, it was that listening tour that led to our movement around cleaning up the social environment of social media. It gave me the courage.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but could you give us some specific examples of what emerged from that listening tour?
I will tell you, Annette, like every single one of those sessions ended in tears. I think for me, the largest takeaway was people who have good intentions but have unconscious bias. And that is a huge issue. And it's from cultural learning, it's our environment. And I think, I then went on I did a massive town hall with our company, and I started talking about it. And I was told that no one in the company had really dealt with this before here, and it was like a tectonic plate shift. And I was bringing things to the forefront that made people feel uncomfortable. And I said, that's okay, because I myself am guilty of it. And I think the first thing about a solution is you need to at least admit you have a problem. And so this is something that is not a one and done deal. We got to keep working on this.
Emily, I mean, this sort of feeds back to what you were saying about vulnerability, to not be afraid to stand up before your staff, before your colleagues, before your company, and address really tough issues. Is there anything that you'd like to add to what Anne just told us?
I think Anne covered that beautifully. I think the only thing I would add that has really come to the fore is that each and every one of us has a responsibility to be educated and to make conscious choices, right? So when I think about this, it's all about understanding, certainly in America, where you live. Who is it that you vote for? Who is your sheriff? Who is your judge? Who are the people that are making decisions around policy? I think the other piece is the role of empathy and the notion of being an upstander and not a bystander. And for companies and corporations to encourage those kinds of difficult conversations end to end, and making sure that we're creating an environment where people can be heard, where people can be understood, and that you're always on the lookout for what might be, as Anne pointed out, a conscious or even an unconscious bias you may not realize. And I've had personal situations where that's happened, and I've wanted to reach in and do something about it. So I think it's that personal responsibility as leaders and corporations in the role to change this, which is extremely important.
And if it's okay, I just want to build on something Emily said. Back to your question about, as business leaders, what can we do? We have incredible brands, right? So our communication to our consumers is through our brands. And I think we also have to be courageous enough to say, if people are not just buying brands today, they want to buy into brands. They want to know what you stand for and what you stand against. And the word authenticity is really important here, because if a brand can authentically help to create a world where we can get rid of these biases. I'll give you 3 examples. You talked about one of them with Absolute. We took a huge stand against, responsible drinking and the role of consent. We have a brand which is Glenlivet, incredible Scotch brand. And the whole idea around that is about breaking down walls. It has always been this category that is, not open to women. We said, well, why not? Let's start breaking down walls. Even here at the Women's Forum, on our site, we talk about Lillet, what a beautiful brand, and this league of extraordinary women, and we take what we believe in, and if the brand can authentically talk about it, use your brands to change the world.
Indeed, and authenticity and integrity have become key values, haven't they, Emily and Anne? Unfortunately, we've got such short time. There's so many things that I want to touch upon. So I'm going to move on to another subject, which is relevant in terms of what we're talking about here. The pandemic has meant that trends such as working from home have now increased at warp speed rate. And, I've witnessed that myself, particularly in France, which tends to be more conservative in that sense of recognition of télétravail, as it's called in French, being now integral for your company to keep operating. So coming back to women and women employees, may I start with you, perhaps, Emily? What do organisations need to do to ensure their female employees feel supported when working from home, especially given that so many of them are still shouldering most of the responsibility of homeschooling, making sure the home is running okay? I mean, they've got a lot on their shoulders to begin with.
Yeah, they definitely do. And I think there's also the very real notion that I think it's 1 in 4 women are considering leaving the workforce because of the pressures that exist in the notion of trying to raise children, manage school, manage your job. I think one of the things, and I touched on it a little bit earlier, is this notion of a truly flexible work time and really empowering and entrusting women in the workforce to take their day and have it work for them, divide up the sections of the day that they need to in order to enable whatever it may be that's happening at home, and managing to the outcome, not to the specific number of calls or hours that you're online. I think that's incredibly important. Another part of it is we have several ERGs. That's an acronym for an employee resource group, where we share lots of information as women, as employees, around what can you do to help? How do you combat this continual video fatigue while you're sort of looking out of the corner of your eye, like, did my 11-year-old take the test? And so it's like a life hack, right? How are you helping? How are you sharing information? How are you supporting one another in the journey, and really creating an environment where women can thrive and can feel like they have control in 2020, where there's not a lot of control. I think that's how we think about it.
And may I ask for your feedback on that too?
I think Emily's absolutely right. We not only do we have to create the flexible time and the services, daycare, all of those things, but we also have to walk the walk. And I'll tell you, before the pandemic, I used to travel 5 days out of the week. I was only home on the weekends, right? So I came home, spent enough time with the kids and my husband, and I'd fly off again. Well, now I am home. I've never lived with my husband this long in the 25 years we've been married, which has been interesting, by the way. But what I'll tell you now is I don't have the help that I used to have. So I'm cooking. I'm figuring out what I'm going to make for breakfast. I've got to figure out how to get the house cleaned. I'm taking on things that I haven't done in a very, very long time. I talk about that stuff to people in my company. I'm like, guys, I need a break. I got to take this hour. Got to make lunch for the kids. So if I can show them that I'm juggling and, I'm being flexible with my time. So walk the walk.
Okay, now at this point, I'm going to bring in some questions from our audience, and this is from Catherine Ladouce, who is the chairman of Cirque Interel. I hope I've got that right. This is a question to both of you. What has your company done to reduce the gender gap created by the pandemic and also increase equity between men and women? Emily, Anne, who would like to start? Anne, maybe?
Yeah, sure. So this is a huge value for us at Pernod Ricard. We talk about it as better balance. And, this is what's really important. It isn't about one or the other. It's about balance. We need diversity of thinking. So we actually, in our company, we look at kind of gender equality at every level of the company. It is one of the things that is a driving value for us and something we work against all the time. And, we not only do that, but, equal pay. So this equality is something that you have got to measure. you've got to work against, you have to have plans against. And remember, most women, there's not a lot of those. You got to have them in your talent pool. Look 3-5 years out. Do you have enough coming in? So this is something that you've got to make a part of how you operate as an organization.
Emily, I'd like to direct that question to you.
Yes, absolutely. So I wholeheartedly agree, Anne, that those are the kinds of things that have to happen. I think in our case, we're also very specifically focused on increasing the percentage of executive women, Annette, in our company. And so how do you do that? It's about pipelining, it's about curating talent, it's about making sure women have opportunities. And it's about that notion I talked a little bit earlier about in terms of sponsorship. Will you put your badge on the table and sponsor that woman into the opportunity versus somebody else? And I think you have to really be prepared to do that, and to do that with a tremendous amount of strength. We're constantly looking at how can we make it a better environment? How can we also give women the tools to excel in organizations and really lead from a place of both comfort and knowledge? I find that oftentimes women don't have the confidence. And so how do you help with the confidence factor and build them up in order to be able to do that? So I think that's something that we're also very focused on in terms of Catherine's question and closing that gap.
And at this point, I'm afraid we've come to the end of what is an incredibly fascinating session. I can see Ebru's there waiting to take over and to thank all of us. But let me thank the both of you, Emily and Anne, for your wonderful insights. And again, next time in Paris, I hope.
Bien sûr. Merci.
And huge thanks from me and to our audience for all the questions and your participation. Please note that there's going to be a short break after this. You can rejoin on the live at the Women's Forum Global Meeting website. Thanks all.